The rain was relentless, each drop like a tiny dagger against my skin as I trudged through the flooded streets of downtown. My thin jacket, a thrift store find from better days, clung to my body, offering no protection against the November chill that cut straight to the bone. The streetlights blurred into hazy halos through the downpour, and my waitressing uniform was soaked beneath my inadequate layers. My feet squished inside shoes that had long ago surrendered their waterproof promise. I'd missed the last bus. Again. The 3-mile walk home loomed ahead after a 12-hour double shift that had yielded barely enough tips to cover next week's groceries. My shoulders ached, my eyes burned from exhaustion, and somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered that this endless struggle, was all my life would ever be. Just keep moving. I muttered to myself, the words lost in the symphony of rain hammering against the pavement. A car splashed by, drenching my already soaked legs with dirty water. I didn't even have the energy to curse. The headlights appeared behind me slowly, a sleek black silhouette cutting through the storm. Unlike the other vehicles that had raced past without a second glance, this one decelerated, purring alongside me like some predatory cat. Even through the rain, I could tell it was expensive, the kind of car I'd only ever seen in movies, or parked outside the high-end restaurants where I couldn't afford to eat. The rear window slid down with mechanical precision. I kept walking, quickening my pace, years of city girl instincts screaming warnings in my head. You'll catch pneumonia walking in this. The voice was deep, accented with something I couldn't place. Italian, maybe? Something European that made ordinary English sound like silk. Allow me to offer you a ride. I hesitated, peering through the rain. The interior light was dim, but I could make out a silhouette, broad shoulders, the gleam of what looked like an expensive watch, the shadowy outline of a man who sat with the easy confidence of someone who owned not just the car, but possibly the whole street it drove on. I don't accept rides from strangers, I said, the words automatic, something my mother had drilled into me since childhood. A soft chuckle emanated from the darkness of the back seat. A wise policy. The car continued to crawl alongside me as I walked. But sometimes, circumstances call for exceptions. You're shivering. He wasn't wrong. My teeth were chattering so hard I worried they might crack. Another block and a half of walking, and suddenly the sleek black car seemed less threatening than the pneumonia he'd mentioned. Where are you headed? He asked, his voice somehow cutting through the rain without raising in volume. Westridge Apartments. The words tumbled out before I could stop them. Stupid. Stupid. You never tell strangers where you live. Ah. Something in that single syllable suggested he knew exactly where that was. The rundown complex on the edge of the district where rent was almost affordable if you worked 2 jobs and had 3 roommates. That's on my way. It wasn't on anyone's way, not anyone who drove a car like that. Lightning cracked across the sky, followed immediately by thunder that seemed to shake the ground beneath my feet. In that brief electric illumination, I caught a glimpse of him. Dark hair, angular jawline dusted with precisely maintained stubble, eyes that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light, and then darkness again, except for the faint red glow of something burning inside the car. A cigar, maybe. Miss? The single word held a question, but also inevitability, as if he already knew my answer, was simply waiting for me to catch up to what had already been decided. Another car roared past, spraying filthy water across my legs. My socks squished with every step. My apartment was still 20 minutes away, and the rain was turning to sleet. Fine, I said, my voice barely audible even to myself. Thank you. The rear door swung open from the inside. I hadn't noticed another person in the car, but now I saw a bulky figure in the front passenger seat, still as a statue facing forward. A driver sat behind the wheel, equally motionless. Neither turned to look at me. I slid into the back seat, bringing Puddles with me, immediately conscious of how out of place I was. The interior smelled of leather, tobacco, and something spicy and expensive. The temperature was perfectly warm. Classical music played at a volume just loud enough to be identified, but not so loud as to interfere with conversation. The man beside me was older than I'd first thought, perhaps in his early 40s, but the kind of older that happens to men in movies, where time only adds character and magnetism. His suit probably cost more than 6 months of my rent, black and impeccably tailored. His hands rested on his thighs. Strong fingers, manicured nails, and a heavy gold ring on his right hand that caught the faint light from the dashboard. "You're drenched," he observed, and without waiting for a response, pressed a button. The partition between the front and back seats slid up silently, sealing us into a private bubble. He reached beneath the seat and produced a soft blanket. "Here." "I'll ruin it," I protested weakly, eyeing the clearly expensive fabric. "It can be replaced," he said with the casual indifference of someone to whom money was an abstract concept rather than a daily worry. I took the blanket, wrapping it around my shoulders, trying not to leave wet marks on the leather seats. "Thank you. Westridge is—" "I know where it is," he interrupted smoothly. The car was already moving, gliding through the storm with barely a sound. "What's your name?" I hesitated. The warmth of the car was seeping into my bones, making me drowsy after so many hours on my feet. The rational part of my brain was screaming stranger danger, but the part of me that was cold, exhausted, and so very tired of fighting every single day just to survive was quieting those alarms. "Ellie," I said finally. "Ellie Winters." He nodded, as if approving of my name. "You may call me Alexander." "May call me. Not my name is." The phrasing struck me as odd, formal in a way people rarely spoke anymore. He offered no last name. "Thank you for the ride, Alexander," I said, trying to match his formality, feeling suddenly self-conscious about my bedraggled appearance. My blonde hair was plastered to my skull. My mascara had certainly raccooned around my eyes, and my uniform, visible beneath my open jacket, was stained from a spilled tray of pasta earlier in my shift. "The pleasure is mine," he replied, and though his expression remained neutral, there was something in his voice that sounded almost like amusement. "You work at Bella Notte, yes? The Italian place on 5th? I stiffened. "How did you know that?" He gestured toward my uniform, the black shirt with the restaurant's logo partially visible beneath my jacket. But something in his eyes made me think he would have known anyway. "Long shift?" he asked, changing the subject. "Double," I admitted. "We're short-staffed and I need the hours." Alexander nodded, his gaze drifting to the window, watching the city blur past. We were moving faster than I'd realized, and I noticed with a jolt that we weren't taking the route to my apartment complex. We were heading downtown, toward the River District, where the penthouses and exclusive clubs were. "This isn't the way to Westridge," I said, a flutter of panic rising in my chest. Alexander turned those dark eyes back to me. "No," he agreed. "It's not." The flutter became a swarm. "I need to go home." "In this weather? To an apartment with, if I had to guess, unreliable heating and questionable security?" He spoke as if discussing the weather, not making assumptions about my living situation that were uncomfortably accurate. "I have a better suggestion." The car slowed, turning into a private drive I'd passed 100 times, but never seen beyond the imposing gates. The kind of exclusive address that appeared in society pages and real estate listings with price upon request. "What are you doing?" My voice came out higher than I intended. "I never agreed to shelter from the storm and appropriate accommodations," Alexander finished for me. "No, you didn't. But I'm offering regardless. A warm meal, dry clothes, and a proper place to rest. Nothing more." His eyes held mine, unblinking. "Unless, of course, you prefer I return you to your situation." The way he said it made Westridge sound like a war zone. And maybe it wasn't far off. The constant police sirens, the deals happening in the stairwells, the locks that didn't quite work on the building's back entrance. I should have demanded he take me home. I should have been terrified, but something in the way he looked at me, like he could see all the exhaustion, all the grinding poverty, all the dead-end days stretching behind and ahead of me, made me hesitate. It was that moment of hesitation that changed everything, because in that brief second where I didn't immediately refuse, he took my silence as assent. The car passed through the gates, which closed behind us with an ominous finality. "Just until the storm passes," I said weakly, knowing even as I spoke that I had made a terrible mistake. The car circled a fountain and stopped before a mansion that loomed against the stormy sky like something from another century. All stone and columns and windows glowing with warm light. "Of course," Alexander agreed, his lips curving into the barest suggestion of a smile, just until the storm passes. Thank you all so much for following this story. If you're enjoying, don't forget to like and subscribe because your support is important for me to continue here. I don't remember falling asleep. The last thing I recall was Alexander leading me through massive double doors into a foyer larger than my entire apartment. There were people, staff I assumed, who materialized and vanished like ghosts at the edges of my vision. Someone took my wet jacket, someone else brought a towel. Alexander said something about a guest room, about dry clothes, about rest. Then nothing until I woke up in a bed that felt like floating on a cloud, surrounded by silk sheets in a room I didn't recognize. Panic seized me immediately, my heart hammering against my ribs as I bolted upright. The movement sent a wave of dizziness through me, and I clutched at the sheets, waiting for the room to stop spinning. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows partially covered by heavy curtains. The room was larger than any bedroom I'd ever been in, larger even than the entire floor plan of my shared apartment. "Where am I?" I whispered to the empty room, my voice sounding small and fragile in the vastness. Memories filtered back slowly. The rain, the black car, Alexander. I glanced down at myself and realized with horror that I wasn't wearing my clothes. Instead, I had on a silk nightgown that probably cost more than a month's wages. Someone had changed me while I was unconscious. The thought made my skin crawl. Beside the bed was a small table with a glass of water and 2 pills, white, unmarked. A note in elegant handwriting said simply, "For the fever." Fever? I touched my forehead, surprised to find it burning hot. Now that I was more aware, I could feel the ache in my joints, the heaviness in my chest. Had I been sick last night? Was that why I couldn't remember anything after arriving at this place? On a chair near the window lay a set of folded clothes, not my clothes, but a soft-looking pair of pants and a cashmere sweater in a shade of blue that would match my eyes perfectly. The coincidence, or deliberate choice, sent another chill through me. I needed to leave. Now. Ignoring the pills, I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood up, only to immediately crash back down as my knees buckled. The room spun violently, black spots dancing in my vision. I was definitely sick. Sicker than I'd been in years. A soft knock at the door made me freeze. "Miss Winters?" A woman's voice, formal but kind. "May I come in?" Before I could answer, the door opened and an older woman entered. She wore what looked like a housekeeper's uniform, pressed and perfect, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. She carried a tray with what smelled like soup and tea. "You're awake. Good." She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Mr. Vitale was concerned. Vitale. So Alexander had a last name after all. "What happened?" I asked, my voice scratchy. "How did I get here? How long have I been asleep?" The woman, whose name badge read Mrs. Palmer, set the tray down on a table near the window. "You collapsed shortly after arriving last night. The doctor said it was exhaustion and the beginning of pneumonia. You've been asleep for nearly 18 hours. 18 hours? I'd missed my morning shift at the diner. I'd be fired for sure." "I need to call work," I said, looking around frantically for my phone, my purse, anything familiar. "I need to explain." "Mr. Vitale has taken care of it," Mrs. Palmer said, her tone suggesting this resolved the matter entirely. "Your employers understand you are ill and will hold your positions." Positions, plural. She knew I worked 2 jobs. What else did Alexander know about me? "Where are my things?" I demanded, trying to sound stronger than I felt. "My clothes, my phone?" "Your clothing is being cleaned and repaired," she replied calmly. "Your personal effects are in the drawer beside you. Mr. Vitale thought you might prefer something more comfortable to wear while you recover." She gestured to the outfit on the chair. I reached for the drawer and found my ancient phone, my keychain with its pepper spray attachment, and my wallet with its grand total of $27. At least they hadn't stolen from me yet. "I need to leave," I said, trying once more to stand, this time more carefully. The room only swayed slightly. Progress. "Mrs. Palmer's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. I wouldn't advise that in your condition, Miss Winters. The doctor recommended at least 3 days of bed rest. I don't have 3 days, I snapped, fear making me harsh. I can't afford to miss work. I can't afford a doctor. And I certainly can't afford whatever this is. I gestured around the opulent room. There is no cost to you, she said, her voice softening slightly. Mr. Vitale has insisted you remain as his guest until you've recovered. Guest. The word felt wrong, like calling a prisoner a resident. Why? I asked, the question that had been burning in my mind since I'd first seen that black car slow down beside me. Why would he help me? He doesn't know me. Mrs. Palmer's face remained carefully neutral. Mr. Vitale helps those he chooses to help. It's not my place to question his reasons. She moved toward the door. I suggest you eat, take your medicine, and rest. Mr. Vitale will visit you this evening. The door closed behind her with a soft click that somehow sounded as final as a prison cell locking. I sank back onto the bed, my legs too weak to keep me standing. What had I gotten myself into? More importantly, how was I going to get out? I glanced at the phone in my hand. No signal. Of course. With nothing else to do, I picked at the soup, a rich homemade chicken broth that was admittedly the most delicious thing I'd tasted in months, and reluctantly took the pills. If they'd wanted to drug me with something nefarious, they'd had 18 hours to do it while I was unconscious. After eating, I felt strong enough to explore the room. It was a suite, really. Bedroom connected to a lavish bathroom with a shower and tub that could have fit 4 people, and a sitting area with bookshelves and a fireplace. The windows overlooked manicured gardens that stretched to a stone wall in the distance. Beyond that, I could see the glitter of the river and the city skyline. We were definitely in the exclusive riverfront district, but set apart from the other mansions, isolated on what looked like private grounds. No wonder I'd never seen this place before. It was hidden in plain sight, a fortress disguised as a home. I tried the door to the hallway, locked. Not surprising. I changed into the clothes that had been left for me. They fit perfectly, which was unsettling, and paced the room, trying to piece together what I knew about Alexander Vitale. The name sounded vaguely familiar, like something I might have overheard or read in passing. He was clearly wealthy, powerful. The way his staff moved around him, the way he carried himself. This wasn't just old money. This was power, the kind that didn't need to announce itself, because everyone already knew. As the day wore on, I dozed intermittently, the fever making me drift in and out of consciousness. Each time I woke, there were fresh supplies by my bed, water, medicine, once a book that I'd mentioned in passing to Mrs. Palmer when she brought lunch. They were watching me, listening to me. The thought should have terrified me more than it did. But the fever made everything seem distant, dreamlike. Twilight was painting the sky in shades of purple and gold when I heard another knock at the door. This one was different, more confident, more commanding. I knew who it was before the door swung open. Alexander Vitale entered like he owned the room, which of course he did. He'd changed from the suit I remembered into another one, this one a deep charcoal gray that made his olive skin glow in the fading light. He carried a small box in one hand and what looked like a folder in the other. "Ellie," he said, my name in his mouth sounding somehow intimate. "You're looking better." I stood by the window, arms crossed over my chest, trying not to show how much effort it took to remain upright. "You had no right to bring me here." His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Amusement, perhaps. "Would you have preferred I left you in the rain to develop the pneumonia you were already catching? Or perhaps dropped you at your apartment, where you live alone, to potentially become unconscious with no one to help you?" I flinched. How did he know I lived alone? My name was on the mailbox with 3 others. My former roommates who had moved out when they couldn't make rent, leaving me with the full burden. "My staff tells me you're anxious about your jobs," he continued, setting the folder on a table. "I've taken the liberty of arranging for your positions to be held, with paid sick leave." "Why?" I demanded, the question bursting from me. "Why are you doing this? What do you want from me?" Alexander regarded me for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable. Must I want something? Everyone wants something, I said bitterly, thinking of every supposed act of kindness in my life that had come with strings attached. Perhaps, he conceded with a slight nod, but not always what you might think. He crossed the room to stand near me, not too close, but close enough that I could smell his cologne, something woody and expensive. Consider it a debt settled. What debt? I've never met you before. A small smile played at the corner of his mouth. No, you haven't, but your father and I had business together once. My father. The man who had abandoned my mother and me when I was 5, leaving nothing but debts and broken promises. The man I hadn't seen or heard from in almost 20 years. You knew my father? I whispered, shock momentarily overriding my fear. I knew of him, Alexander corrected. We had mutual interests. He owed me something valuable. When I discovered his daughter was living in my city, I became curious. A chill that had nothing to do with my fever crept up my spine. You've been watching me. It wasn't a question, but he inclined his head slightly, neither confirming nor denying. Let's say I've been aware of your situation. Last night presented an opportunity to meet you properly. There was nothing proper about drugging me and bringing me here against my will, I snapped, anger flaring through my fear. Alexander's expression hardened slightly. You were ill. Dangerously so. The doctor gave you medication for the fever, nothing more. You are not a prisoner, Ellie, merely a guest recovering from pneumonia. So I can leave, right now, I challenged, already knowing the answer. You could, he said carefully. I wouldn't stop you. But the doctor advises against it, and it would be unwise to ignore medical advice in your condition. The way he said unwise made it clear this was more than a suggestion. What did my father owe you? I asked, changing tactics. Money? Alexander laughed, a surprisingly warm sound in the growing darkness of the room. Money is rarely the most valuable currency, Ellie. He stepped closer, and this time I had to force myself not to back away. But that's a conversation for when you're stronger. For now, rest, recover. He placed the small box he'd been holding on the table beside me, a gift, for your comfort during your stay. Before I could respond, he turned and walked to the door. There, he paused, looking back at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. I'll have dinner sent up. Tomorrow, if you're feeling better, perhaps you'll join me downstairs. There's much we should discuss. The door closed behind him, and this time, I heard the distinct click of a lock engaging. I sank onto the window seat, legs finally giving out. My father, Alexander Vitale. Some mysterious debt. None of it made sense, and all of it terrified me. With trembling fingers, I opened the box Alexander had left. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet, antique by the look of it, set with small sapphires that matched the blue of the sweater I wore. It was beautiful. It was expensive. It felt like a shackle. Morning came with the soft sound of rain against the windows, and the realization that the fever had broken during the night. I felt weak but clearer, my mind no longer foggy with illness. The clarity brought no comfort, only sharper fear. I'd spent half the night examining the bracelet Alexander had given me. It was old, vintage or antique, with craftsmanship you rarely saw in modern jewelry. The silver was tarnished in the crevices in a way that couldn't be faked, and the sapphires caught the light with the deep blue fire that only real gems possessed. I'd worked at a pawn shop one summer during college. I knew enough to recognize that this wasn't costume jewelry. This was the kind of piece that belonged in a museum or a family vault. The other half of the night I'd spent trying to unlock the door, to pry open the windows, to find any way out of my gilded prison. Nothing had worked. The door was solid oak with a serious lock. The windows, while large and beautiful, didn't open, or if they did, I couldn't figure out the mechanism. I was trapped, waiting for Alexander Vitale to decide what happened next. A soft knock preceded Mrs. Palmer's entrance. She carried fresh towels and a tray with tea and toast. Good morning, Miss Winters. You're looking much improved. I sat on the edge of the bed, the bracelet clutched in my palm. When can I leave? Mrs. Palmer's smile didn't waver. Mr. Vitale has asked me to inform you that you're free to move about the house today, should you feel up to it. He's arranged for lunch in the solarium at 1 o'clock. Not exactly the freedom I had in mind. And if I want to leave the house entirely? Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Mr. Vitale mentioned you had concerns about your employment. He's taken the liberty of having your belongings brought from your apartment. They're being arranged in the blue suite down the hall, a more permanent accommodation than this recovery room. My blood ran cold. He went into my apartment? Mr. Vitale has people who handle such matters, she replied, as if that made it better somehow. He thought you might be more comfortable with your own things around you during your convalescence. Convalescence. Such an old-fashioned word, like something from a Victorian novel, where young women were always falling ill with mysterious fevers and being sequestered in remote mansions. How long does he expect me to stay? I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady. Mrs. Palmer arranged the tea things on the bedside table with precise movements. That would be a matter for you to discuss with Mr. Vitale, miss. Where is he now? Mr. Vitale attends to business in the mornings. He's quite busy until lunch. She glanced at my clenched fist. I see he gave you the Winterset bracelet. It's been in the family collection for generations, waiting for the right wrist. The name struck me like a physical blow. Winterset? Mrs. Palmer nodded. A remarkable coincidence with your surname, isn't it? Though perhaps Mr. Vitale doesn't believe in coincidences. She left me with more questions than answers, the bracelet suddenly feeling heavier in my hand. Winterset. My last name was Winters, not Winterset. But it was close enough to make me wonder what Alexander really knew about my father, about my family. After forcing down some toast and tea to build my strength, I decided to test the boundaries of my new freedom. I changed into another outfit that had been left for me, a pair of jeans and a sweater that, like everything else in this place, fit me perfectly, and ventured into the hallway. No one stopped me. In fact, the corridor was eerily empty, though I had the distinct feeling I was being watched. The house was even larger than I'd imagined, a maze of hallways and rooms that spoke of old money and power. Original artwork hung on walls, antiques filled corners, and every surface gleamed with polish and care. This wasn't just wealth, this was dynasty. I wandered for what felt like hours, opening doors to find libraries, sitting rooms, and what appeared to be a small gallery of Renaissance art. Twice I thought I heard footsteps behind me, but when I turned, the hallway was empty. The few staff members I encountered nodded politely, but offered no conversation. Eventually, I found myself in what must have been the main foyer, a grand space with a sweeping staircase and marble floors. Directly ahead were the massive double doors I vaguely remembered from my arrival. Freedom was just beyond them. I had taken 3 steps toward the exit, when a voice stopped me. The gardens are lovely, even in the rain, but I wouldn't recommend them in your condition. I turned to find a man I hadn't seen before standing at the base of the staircase. He was younger than Alexander, but had a similar bearing, expensive suit, watchful eyes, and an air of authority. Unlike Alexander's smooth Italian accent, this man's voice carried the sharp edges of Eastern Europe. Who are you? I asked, not bothering to hide my suspicion. Dmitry Volkov, head of security. He didn't move from his position, but somehow his presence seemed to fill the space between me and the doors. Mr. Vitale asked me to ensure your safety during your stay. My safety or my captivity? I challenged. A hint of amusement crossed his face. In this house, Miss Winters, those concepts are often the same. So I am a prisoner. You are a guest under protection. He glanced at his watch. It's nearly 1. The solarium is through the east wing. Would you like me to escort you? It wasn't really a question. I could feel the weight of unseen eyes watching us, the subtle pressure of command in his voice. I had pushed as far as I could for now. Lead the way, I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. The solarium was breathtaking, a cathedral of glass and wrought iron that jutted from the back of the house, overlooking gardens that stretched to the river beyond. Despite the rain, light filled the space, reflecting off white marble floors and dancing through tropical plants that thrived in the controlled climate. Alexander was already there, seated at a small table set for 2. He rose when we entered, a gesture of old-world courtesy that seemed both natural and calculated. Ellie, he said, his voice warm as if greeting a friend he'd known for years. You look much better today. I trust you slept well? I ignored the pleasantry, You broke into my apartment. If my bluntness surprised him, he didn't show it. I arranged for your belongings to be collected, yes. Your lease has been paid through the end of the year, should you wish to return. He gestured to the chair across from him. Please sit. You're still recovering. I don't want to sit. I want answers. What did my father owe you? Why am I here? What is this? I held up the bracelet I'd brought with me. Alexander's expression softened, and for a moment, he looked almost sad. So many questions, and all connected. Please, Ellie. Sit. Eat. I promise I'll explain. My legs were already trembling from the morning's exertion, my body reminding me that I was still weak from illness. I sat, if only to avoid collapsing. A server appeared from nowhere, setting down plates of food that looked like art. Delicate arrangements of color and texture that made my usual meals seem like gruel in comparison. You said my father owed you something valuable, I said, ignoring the food. What was it? Alexander took his time answering, cutting a piece of his salmon with precise movements. Your father, James Winters, or James Winterset, as he was born, came from a family much like mine. Old connections, old wealth, old responsibilities. The name hit me like a physical blow. Winterset. My father's name was Winters. He changed it when he ran away with your mother, Alexander said calmly. A fresh start, I believe he called it. A chance to escape the family business. My hands trembled as I reached for the water glass. What business? Alexander's dark eyes held mine. The same business I'm in, Ellie, the business of power. You're being deliberately vague, I accused. A slight smile touched his lips. Some things are better left unnamed in certain conversations. Let's say your father and I operated in similar circles, with similar interests, until he decided to leave that life behind. You're talking about something illegal. My voice dropped to a whisper as understanding dawned. The expensive cars, the security, the isolated mansion, the way everyone deferred to him with that particular mix of respect and fear. You're in the Mafia. Alexander didn't confirm or deny it, but his silence was answer enough. And my father? I pressed, my world tilting beneath me. The Winterset family has controlled certain interests in this region for generations, he said carefully. When your father left, it created a vacuum, one that my family eventually filled. I struggled to reconcile this information with the vague memories I had of my father, a quiet man who read me bedtime stories and always smelled of mint gum. I don't believe you. Alexander reached into his jacket and removed a photograph, sliding it across the table to me. It showed two men, much younger, standing in front of what looked like a nightclub. One was unmistakably my father, his arm around the shoulders of a man who could only be a youthful Alexander. We were friends once, Alexander said softly, before he betrayed his obligations, before he stole something that didn't belong to him. What did he steal? I asked, unable to look away from the photograph, from this evidence of a life I'd never known my father had, the Winterset legacy, the connections, the territories, the loyalties that should have been preserved for the next generation. Alexander's eyes lingered on my face. For you. I felt sick. I don't want any part of whatever this is. And yet, here you are, he gestured around us, in your family's rightful place. The Winterset bracelet on your wrist, or in your hand at least. I set the bracelet on the table between us. I don't want it. It's yours by blood, regardless of what you want. Alexander pushed it gently back toward me. Just as certain responsibilities are mine, regardless of what I might personally desire. What responsibilities? To protect what's mine, to honor old agreements. His voice softened. To look after the daughter of a man who was once like a brother to me. You don't even know me, I protested. Alexander's gaze was steady, penetrating. I know you work 2 jobs to survive, yet still send money to your mother in assisted living every month. I know you graduated with honors despite working full-time throughout college. I know you haven't had a proper meal or a full night's sleep in years, yet you never complain, never ask for help. The extent of his knowledge about my life was terrifying. You've been watching me. For how long? Since your father died 3 months ago. The world seemed to stop. What? Alexander's expression changed, genuine surprise crossing his features. You didn't know. My father's been gone for 20 years, I said, my voice hollow. He left when I was 5. Alexander was silent for a long moment. He left your life, yes, but he remained very much alive, Ellie. He died in Naples on July 12th, heart attack. The room seemed to spin around me. 20 years of abandonment, of wondering, of building a story in my head about who my father was and why he'd left. All of it crumbling in the face of this new information. He hadn't just disappeared. He'd started a new life somewhere else. And now he was truly gone, the possibility of answers buried with him. Why didn't anyone tell me? I whispered. Your mother knew. I assumed she had told you, my mother, whose mind had been slipping away for years, trapped in a fog of early-onset dementia. She probably hadn't understood, hadn't remembered to tell me. His death changed things, Alexander continued after a moment. Released certain obligations, created new ones. What does that mean for me? I asked, suddenly exhausted. Alexander reached across the table, his fingers brushing mine. It means you have choices to make, Ellie Winterset. About who you are. About what you want to become. I pulled my hand away. My name is Winters. For now, he agreed, and the certainty in his voice sent a chill through me. But blood has a way of calling us back to who we truly are. Your father discovered that in the end. What do you mean? Alexander's eyes held a sadness I hadn't seen before. He was coming home, Ellie. Coming back to make amends, to set things right. His heart gave out before he could return. I stood suddenly, unable to bear any more revelations. I need time. To think. Of course. Alexander rose as well, towering over me. Take all the time you need. You're safe here. Safe. The word seemed to mock me. I'd never felt less safe in my life. As I turned to leave, his voice stopped me. Ellie. The bracelet. I looked back at the silver and sapphires gleaming on the table between us. It belonged to your grandmother, he said softly. And her mother before her. It's part of your heritage, whatever you decide. I hesitated, then took it, clutching it in my fist as I fled the solarium, emotions I couldn't name threatening to drown me. Behind me, I felt Alexander's eyes following, patient and certain, like a predator who knows his prey has nowhere to run. Night fell, and with it came a storm that matched the turmoil inside me. Lightning illuminated my new quarters, the blue suite Mrs. Palmer had mentioned, in harsh flashes, revealing unfamiliar shadows in a room filled with my familiar possessions. My books stacked neatly on shelves built for leather-bound classics. My threadbare quilt, the one my grandmother had made, spread across a bed that probably cost more than my entire life's earnings. My photographs, the cheap frames looking shabby against the silk wallpaper, all of it wrong, all of it right. Like me in this house, something that didn't belong yet somehow fit into a space that had been waiting. I'd spent the afternoon poring over the contents of a folder Alexander had sent to my room, documents about my father, about the Winterset family, about a legacy I'd never known existed. Birth certificates showing my father's true name, property deeds in Naples, in New York, in this very city, newspaper clippings obliquely referencing business dealings that never quite named what business was being done, and photographs. So many photographs of my father in another life. Younger, harder, surrounded by men in expensive suits with watchful eyes. And later, softer images of him in Italy, sitting at cafes, walking along a marina, always alone. Always with that same look of melancholy I remembered from my childhood. I twisted the bracelet around my wrist, where I'd finally placed it out of a strange sense of connection to a family I'd never known. The weight of it was unfamiliar, but not uncomfortable. A knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. "Come in," I called, expecting Mrs. Palmer with evening tea, or perhaps Dimitri checking on my safety. Instead, Alexander entered, bringing with him the scent of rain and that indefinable aura of power that seemed to fill any space he occupied. He'd changed from his earlier suit to more casual attire, though his version of casual still involved tailored slacks and a shirt that probably cost more than a month of my rent. "You've been reading," he observed, nodding toward the scattered papers on my bed. "Trying to understand a life I never knew existed," I replied, too emotionally exhausted for hostility. Alexander moved to the window, looking out at the storm. Lightning cast his profile in stark relief. The strong jaw, the aristocratic nose, the eyes that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light. "And what have you concluded?" he asked, his voice quiet beneath the roll of thunder. "That I didn't know my father at all. That my mother kept secrets from me my entire life. That you—" I hesitated. "That you know more about my family than I do." He turned to face me. "Not more. Different parts. Your mother knew James the idealist, the man who wanted to escape his birthright. I knew James the heir, the reluctant prince of an empire built in shadow. And which was the real him?" Alexander's expression softened slightly. "Both. Neither. We all wear different faces for different worlds, Ellie. Like you're doing now?" I challenged, finding a spark of my earlier defiance. "Playing the gracious host instead of— what, the ruthless crime boss?" A brief smile touched his lips. "Is that what you think I am? Isn't it what you've been implying? All this talk of family business and territories and power?" I stood up, suddenly needing to be on more equal footing. "Stop dancing around it. Tell me exactly who you are, who my father was, and what you want from me." Alexander was silent for a long moment, studying me with an intensity that made me want to look away. I didn't. "Your father and I were born to families that have controlled certain enterprises in this region for generations," he finally said. "Not everything we did was strictly legal, but not everything was criminal either. Power exists in the gray spaces, Ellie." "So you're admitting you're in the Mafia?" I pressed. "That word is a simplification, but yes, if it helps you understand." He moved closer, his presence filling the space between us. "Your father was positioned to take control of the Winterset holdings when his father died. Instead, he ran away with your mother, abandoning his responsibilities, his family connections. He took something valuable when he left. Information, leverage, call it what you will, that protected him from repercussions. And now that he's dead, that protection is gone, I guessed. Pieces falling into place. That's why you suddenly appeared in my life." Alexander nodded. "Partly. But there's more. Your father contacted me before he died. He wanted to make amends, to ensure you would be protected after he was gone. He knew his heart was failing. Protected from what?" I asked, though I was beginning to understand. "From the vacuum his death would create. From those who might see you as leverage, as a weakness to exploit." Alexander's voice hardened. "There are others in our world who aren't as principled as I am." A bitter laugh escaped me. "Principled? You've basically kidnapped me. I've given you sanctuary," he corrected. "Had I left you in that apartment, alone and unaware of your heritage, you would have been dead within a week of the news spreading that James Winterset's daughter was unprotected." The certainty in his voice sent a chill through me. "Why would anyone care about me? I'm nobody." "You're a Winterset," Alexander said, as if that explained everything. "Blood matters in our world, Ellie. Lineage, legacy. With your father gone, certain holdings, certain loyalties, revert to his heir." The implication hung in the air between us. "Me," I whispered. "You're saying I've inherited some kind of criminal empire?" "I'm saying you've inherited a position of significance, should you choose to claim it." Alexander reached out, his fingers brushing over the bracelet on my wrist. "Your father hoped you never would. He wanted you kept away from this life. That was part of our final agreement." "Then why bring me here? Why tell me any of this?" Lightning flashed, illuminating the intensity in his eyes. "Because I don't have the luxury of honoring that agreement anymore. Things have changed. Balances of power have shifted. Your father's old rivals know about you now, and they'll come for you whether you understand what you represent or not." I pulled away from his touch, my mind reeling. "So what am I supposed to do? Just hide here forever?" "No." Alexander's voice was firm. "You have choices, Ellie. Always remember that." "What choices? It sounds like I'm trapped no matter what." He moved to the window again, his back to me. "You could claim your birthright. Take control of the Winterset interests, with my guidance and protection until you learn the business. It would create a powerful alliance between our families." "Become a criminal, you mean?" I said flatly. He turned, one eyebrow raised. "Is that worse than being a wage slave? Working yourself to exhaustion for employers who see you as disposable? At least in our world, power is honest about what it is. His words struck uncomfortably close to the despair I'd felt, trudging through the rain that night, invisible to the world that exploited my labor without valuing my humanity. "What's the other choice?" I asked, my voice smaller than I intended. "Renounce your claim, formally, officially, with witnesses from the families. Transfer your birthright to me as your father's former right hand. I would absorb the Winterset holdings into my own. And then what? I just go back to my old life like none of this happened?" Alexander shook his head. "You couldn't go back to your old apartment, your old jobs. It wouldn't be safe. But I could set you up somewhere new, somewhere distant, with a new identity. Enough money to start fresh, to never worry about rent or medical bills again. Exile." That's what he was offering. A comfortable cage in some distant city. Always looking over my shoulder, always wondering if my past had found me. "And if I choose neither option?" I challenged. His expression hardened. "Then you leave here unprotected, with every rival family knowing exactly who you are and what you represent. I give you 3 days, at most." The casual certainty with which he predicted my death sent ice through my veins. I sat on the edge of the bed, legs suddenly unable to support me. "Why are you really doing this?" I asked, searching his face for the truth. "It can't just be about some old promise to my father." Alexander was silent for a long moment, the storm filling the space between us with electricity and shadow. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, softer, almost vulnerable. "I loved your father like a brother. We grew up together, trained together, learned the business side by side. When he left, when he betrayed everything we'd built." He paused, something like old pain crossing his features. "I hated him for years, then I understood him, and finally I envied him." Envied him? The concept seemed impossible, this powerful man envying my father's life of anonymity and struggle. "He chose freedom, Ellie. He chose love over duty. It's a choice men in my position rarely get to make." Alexander's eyes met mine, something raw and honest in them that I hadn't seen before. "When I saw you walking in the rain that night, I recognized you immediately. You have his eyes, his stubborn chin, but you have something he lost, that fire, that determination to survive no matter what life throws at you." He moved closer, until he was standing directly before me. "I didn't just promise your father I'd protect you. I promised myself I'd give you what he never could, the truth about who you are and the power to choose your own path." "Even if that path leads away from you?" I asked, suddenly understanding something I hadn't seen before. The way he looked at me wasn't just about obligation or power or my father's legacy. There was something else there, something more personal. Alexander reached down, his fingers tilting my chin up so our eyes met. Even then, though I admit, I hope it doesn't. The intensity in his gaze made my breath catch. This close, I could see the flecks of amber in his dark eyes, the slight scar above his left eyebrow, the controlled power in every line of his body. "Why?" I whispered. "Because in all my years in this life, I've never met anyone who intrigued me the way you do. Your resilience, your defiance, your unwillingness to be broken by a world that's tried its best to break you." His thumb brushed across my cheek, the touch electric. "I find myself invested in your future, Ellie Winterset, more than I should be." The air between us seemed charged with possibilities, dangerous, exhilarating possibilities I'd never imagined for myself. A world of power and risk, of luxury and danger. A world where I might never again have to count pennies for bus fare or choose between medicine and food. A world with this enigmatic, dangerous man who looked at me like I was something precious and powerful, not the invisible girl I'd been my entire life. "I need time," I said, pulling back slightly from his touch. "To think. To decide." Alexander nodded, stepping back. "Of course. Take all the time you need." He moved toward the door, then paused, looking back at me. "But not too much time, Ellie. The world won't wait forever." After he left, I stood at the window, watching lightning split the sky above a city that suddenly seemed both familiar and foreign. Below, in the garden, I could see the silhouettes of men patrolling the grounds, Dimitri's security team, keeping watch. Keeping me safe, or keeping me contained? Perhaps both. Just as this house was both my sanctuary and my prison, just as Alexander was both my protector and my captor. I touched the bracelet on my wrist, feeling the weight of history, of legacy, of blood. My father had run from this life, had hidden me from it. But perhaps he'd always known it would find me eventually. Perhaps that's why he'd reached out to Alexander at the end. Not just to protect me, but to give me the choice he'd never felt he had. The storm was beginning to pass, the lightning more distant, the rain softening to a gentle patter against the glass. Dawn would come soon, bringing with it the day I would have to decide who I truly was. Ellie Winters, the struggling waitress with nothing to her name, or Ellie Winterset, heir to a dynasty built in shadow. As the first pale light of morning touched the horizon, I made my choice. I would stay. Not out of fear, not out of weakness, but because for the first time in my life, I had the power to choose my own fate instead of just surviving whatever fate handed me. I would learn this world, understand it, master it if I could. I would discover who my father truly was, and in doing so, perhaps discover who I might become. And Alexander Vitale, he would be my guide, my protector, perhaps something more. The electricity between us couldn't be denied. The pull I felt toward him both terrifying and exhilarating. I slipped into bed as the storm faded completely, the Winterset bracelet still on my wrist, Alexander's scent still lingering in the room. And for the first time in years, I fell asleep without fear of what tomorrow might bring. Instead, I dreamed of power, of passion, and of possibilities I'd never dared imagine. I dreamed of becoming someone new, someone stronger, someone who would never again be invisible in the rain. Thank you all so much for following this story. If you're enjoying it, don't forget to like and subscribe because your support is important for me to continue here.